Welcome, everyone, to the Success Elevated podcast. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Lee, and I am joined this week by a very special guest, Tommy Hoopsick, owner of two DUCTZ franchises, one in Richmond, Virginia, and one outside of Philadelphia, right?
Yes, sir.
Tommy, thanks for coming on the podcast this week. Super excited to have you on to talk all things owning and operating a franchise, as well as just growing a business. So thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I want to, first and foremost, I want to talk about your background, but you as well as a handful of our other guests have actually reached out to us directly. The majority of our guests we contact, or we find somebody in the industry that we think would be a good fit on the podcast, and we reach out to them. But you actually reached out to us. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe just, before we started recording, you had mentioned kind of how you found us. If you wouldn't mind, just take a few minutes and kind of mention that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So 3 weeks ago, maybe, I was at the Nexus convention in Las Vegas at the Mirage, which is Nexus, and Ramsco was kind of like hosting it. And, you get the little magazine booklet when you're walking around the exhibit.
Yeah.
I saw the ad in there and I was like, oh, let me shoot these guys an email and see what happens. So that's how I found out about it, is directly through the magazine at the convention.
Oh, love it. I love giving Michelle Blevins and CNR a little shout out there that print advertising works, ladies and gentlemen. It's still a thing. I know we're so much in the digital realm, and that's what we deal with day to day at Spot On Solutions, but print advertising is still a thing, and it's still a good thing. So love it. Thanks. I wanted to make sure we mentioned that just because I thought it was really cool that you found us in the magazine. So Tommy, you contacted me, and yeah, you're the owner of a couple of DUCTZ franchises. And when you first kind of sent me that email, you said you bought your first one when you were 19 years old, which is really, really cool. And I want to kind of start having you kind of talk to our audience a little bit about that initial story. How did you first get involved with DUCTZ franchises? What made you want to buy a franchise? What were all the hoops you had to jump through as a 19-year-old kid that probably didn't have a ton of credit, right? You're still kind of a teenager. So how did you start your first business?
Yeah, so it's funny because everyone always asks you, like, hey, what's your professional background? And I'm always like, yeah, I never had, didn't have. I knew at a young age that like I wanted to start a business eventually one day, but the timing with DUCTZ in Richmond kind of being available for sale and me wanting something and me actually having a little bit of money, like the stars kind of just aligned. So I do think of it like almost like DUCTZ found me. I didn't find it, because it kind of just worked out and happened. But the whole story on that is in high school, like as I was finishing high school, I worked with the people that owned the DUCTZ in Richmond because I played basketball with their son. So I like did some work with them, helped them on the jobs. And then I also had another job working at Food Line, which is a grocery store. I worked in the distribution center, which actually that was the only real job I ever had. And that was actually a really cool job because like you had to put boxes on pallets and load them on trucks. Yeah. And basically the faster you worked, the more money you made. So it was great because I was like 18, 19 years old, eating as much fast food as I want, was always in shape no matter what, because I just like worked all day long lifting 50-pound boxes. And the faster you went, the more money you made. So it was, for a 19-year-old, it was like the best job you could have. And I was making like $24 an hour. And this was back in 2010 and 11. So that was decent money back then for a 19-year-old with no bills. Yeah. So I ended up saving up a bunch of money. And Russell, who owned the DUCTZ in Richmond, I gave him like 20,000 down or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I gave him like some cash down. And then he gave me 2 years to like pay him the rest. And I think we did it in like a year and 8 months. We paid it off, and that's awesome, which was really cool because that was like a fear, like, can we even do this in 2 years? And then we got a couple big jobs and made it happen in time. But I say we because it truly is a family business. Like without my parents and my older brother's help, never even would have had a chance. So it's definitely a family business. And really that's how it started. Like I knew Matt, their son, because I played basketball with him. worked with them, and I kind of had some money at the same time. They wanted to sell it, and they were like, hey, why don't you buy it? Because I was actually thinking about a couple other businesses. And then, like I said, it kind of just worked out.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. Now, the process for getting, because DUCTZ is owned by Belfour Property
Right.
Restoration.
Right.
So Belfour has Belfour Franchise Group, which is their separate division that owns all their franchises. So getting the people at Belfour Franchise Group to sell a 19-year-old a franchise was probably just as hard as getting the money and doing it.
Yeah.
But anyhow, basically, I had one guy who is like the king of duct cleaning ever, Tom Iacobellis. He was actually the president of DUCTZ at the time, and he basically, fought for me and was like, hey, if you guys aren't going to sell him a franchise, then why are you even selling businesses? Like he's a young guy that wants to make something happen. Like give him a chance. So basically Tom went to bat for me, and he's the only reason that they actually sold the franchise to me. So that's kind of the whole story of how the initial one happened. And then fast forward a few years into it, the same situation was going on at the Philadelphia location. The guy Jabbar that owned it was not really building the business the way he needed to make it worth his while. So he kind of had some other businesses going on, and I basically got it from him for a pretty good deal because he didn't want it. DUCTZ kind of was over him, and it was just like it was either going to shut down and not exist, or he could sell it to me, and I got a really good deal on it, and that's how I ended up getting the second location.
Love it. Well, I there's so much there that I think we can kind of dive a little bit further into, but I just love the idea that you just knew from a young age you wanted to start a business, and the description of that DUCTZ found you is a really, really cool way to describe that, and I love it. Talk a little bit about what is DUCTZ. Like you said, it's owned by Belfour. People just kind of looking at the name kind of figure, oh, you probably do some duct cleaning. Okay. But what is kind of the franchise model of DUCTZ, and what have you guys done to, what's your main client? Who are you looking for? Maybe talk a little bit about what is DUCTZ.
Yeah. So, Belfour Franchise Group actually has I think it's almost 30 companies now that they own. And DUCTZ was the original one that they started with. And then they've added all these others. So at DUCTZ, we specifically do duct cleaning and dryer vent cleaning. Like that's it. Like it literally is a specialty niche business. And we work when you start a DUCTZ, you approach every HVAC company there is and say, hey guys, this is probably something you don't do. It's probably something you don't want to do because you're not going to make as much money doing this as you will installing a unit. So if your customer asks about it, you should just tell them to call us. So you build your business off that. And then once you have, money in the bank to do big projects and things like that, you can work with restoration contractors and do, larger fire jobs and things like that, and really take on the big projects. But as a general starting point, you're going to build your business off of small residential duct cleanings for HVAC contractors. And then, once you build up your bank account, you can start taking on the larger projects. But it really is just a true niche business of duct cleaning, dryer vent cleaning, some coil cleaning. But coil cleaning gets kind of separated out and is in the wording. But like on every standard duct cleaning we do, we clean the coil already, like in the process.
Right.
So
your focus is the ducts. Like that's what you guys are doing. Gotcha.
It's the HVAC system. So like anything, the unit, coil, anything in the HVAC system, it should get cleaned according to the NADCA standards for National Air Duct Cleaners Association and the EPA guidelines. Like when you clean an HVAC system, you should clean the unit, coil, blower, fan, all the ductwork, supply, return, supply branch, supply trunk, return branch, return trunk, and the grills. So that is a full cleaning, to the standard, and that's what we do. And most duct cleaning companies do not do that. And because there's a lot of liability with touching the HVAC units. And if you, damage one of those while you're doing the work, it's a very expensive day, which I've had that feeling, and I know that feeling, and it is expensive. But to do the work properly according to standard, you do have to do the unit. And that's where we really use it to separate ourselves, is like we give people the list of like, this is the EPA guidelines, this is the NAGCA standard, this is what we follow, and this is our price for doing it. And if you're gonna get another price from someone, you should ask them, hey, are you following this list?
Are you cleaning all of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, it's a lot of knowledge too. So like we spend a lot of time, I don't want to say training, but just like helping other companies that interact with us, like HVAC companies or restoration companies, understand the ins and outs of duct cleaning and what we do. So because a lot of times on a restoration project, the restoration contractor will have to have these conversations with the adjuster on your behalf. And as their duct cleaner, you need to be able to give them info so that they know what they're talking about and not making a fool of themselves.
Right. I love that. Well, and like you said, like when you're talking like a restoration job, like a lot of people miss that there are extra things that need to be cleaned, like the ducts or the registers or whatever it is, if you have something like fire or smoke damage. When I was in junior high, thankfully we didn't have, well, it's not thankful because growing up without central air conditioning was not great, but we didn't have central air. But when I was in junior high, we had a smoke damage incident at my home. And the amount of just like, there was what had happened is we had a fireplace in our basement that the flue pipe that fell over on top of the fireplace and melted and sent smoke and ash throughout the home, and nobody was home. So it went for 3, 4, 5 hours, just smoke all throughout our house. Thankfully, there wasn't any, like, the house didn't actually catch fire, but there was just smoke and soot everywhere. And, fireplaces downstairs in our basement, upstairs in my parents' master bedroom where the door had been closed, and in their dresser, my dad was finding ash in like his socks. Like that's how much, like, people just don't realize how much needs to be cleaned after an incident like that. And like, your ducts and your registers and your HVAC unit, like all of that needs to be taken care of in an instant like that. And having that kind of good partnership with a restoration company that, hey, if they're not going to be the ones doing this, they're going to work with somebody that's, has the experience like you guys. Like, that's so important. And you mentioned there that if you're going to get another bid from somebody else, hey, make sure they're cleaning all of this stuff, because that's what we do. We clean all of this, but you want to make sure that no matter who you go to, they're taking care of that for you.
And coming out, who knows when it'll actually get completely released, but the IICRC has new standards coming out for assessments on fires. And that's going to be, we're not sure, but we think that's going to be a huge thing for ducts and just for the duct cleaning industry, just because everyone's going to now be required to, at least at minimum, get an HVAC assessment after a fire or smoke incident. So we think, we're going to need to hire people just to be doing assessments full time. So we think it's going to be a pretty big thing. And I mean, I had in 2022, I had 2 big projects that I went and looked at. Like, one of them was a Target. I mean, there's smoke and soot everywhere. Yeah. And they just didn't do anything. They were like, they got the assessment, got the report. Target was like, no, we got to get open by such and such date. Because it was like right around July 4th. They were like, we got to get open. We don't have time for that. And they never did anything. And I was like,
they don't know. I'm sure they're probably still finding smoke and soot in places, right? Like, because they didn't get it cleaned. Like,
I would imagine.
It's mind boggling when it comes to like fire damage like that. Like, I mean, it just blows me away. The amount of like, we were finding smoke and just the weirdest, like randomest places that were like, this is as far away from our fireplace as possible, and we're still like finding little bits of stuff. Oh, it's crazy.
It's funny too that you say that, because there's something like, there's a big thing with duct work. It's crazy too. Like, so I was in a house for a friend of mine, but it was his son, and they were like, hey, we think we have a dead mouse or something in the duct, because this one vent in the kitchen smells absolutely horrible, right? So I go over to their house, and sure enough, the air comes on. There's two vents in the kitchen. There's like three in the living room that is attached to it, and then each bedroom obviously has one. The smell coming out of the kitchen vent by the glass sliding door is just the worst you've ever smelled. It was horrible, right?
Jeez.
So naturally, what do you think? You're like, oh yeah, there's a mouse in that duct somewhere because there's a 6-inch round branch line that runs to that duct, and you're
Right.
like, oh, there's probably a mouse in because it's the only vent out of 15 in the house that smells bad, and they're all blowing air. But it doesn't work like that because, like,
No.
sure enough, we go down to the basement, we open up the HVAC unit, we turn it off, open it up. There's a dead mouse on the squirrel cage on the blower wheel.
Oh
And
my gosh.
the air goes from that blower wheel and is forced up through the system and then splits and goes to every vent. So like naturally you'd be like, oh, well, it has to smell in every vent. The mouse is in the central location where all the air touches. But no, only one vent in the entire house smells. So
Oh my
it's
gosh.
it's kind of crazy because like people will call us now after this experience, people will call us and they're like, oh yeah, my upstairs bedroom, there's a dead mouse in that vent because it's the only one that smells. And I'm like, well, I wish it was that easy, but you never know.
You never
Um,
know. Right. Like
and
that.
it's just like with the smoke. It's like when and I've seen it working with our restoration companies we work with. Like sometimes it is so impossible to find that last bit of soot or smoke or whatever that's causing the smell issue. It's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. Tommy, not to well, and this isn't really a backtrack, but to kind of go to what you had mentioned originally when you bought your first Ducks franchise. You had mentioned that like so you had kind of the initial down payment made, but you were able to pay off the loan like pretty quickly, which I would assume is probably much faster than most people pay off any kind of like business loan or anything like that, which is really impressive. So talk a little bit about when you first bought the business. Talk a little bit about your mindset. Was that the goal that you were like, okay, I'm going to pay this loan off as quick as possible, so I'm going to be as lean as I can. We're going to, not have a ton of employees. I don't know what exactly it looked like, but talk a little bit about kind of your mindset and what you had to do to get rid of that debt as quickly as possible when you first bought your franchise.
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely obviously trying to be as lean as possible. And when I bought the truck and the whole package, like you bought the franchise, you kind of got all the tools and equipment you need. So it wasn't like we had to buy a ton of stuff. We bought, obviously we bought small things, but you basically had everything you need. So it's about how quick can you go out and get work. You've got the equipment and what you need to do. Let's say 500,000 a year. How quick can you get yourself to that number?
Yeah.
So yeah, we were living lean, and we got we got a couple big jobs really that kick started the whole thing. And that's it's kind of the industry standard with these businesses is like you have your small residential jobs to pay your bills and you really make your money on those big hitters. So
Yeah.
we timing was good. We got a couple of those big hitters while living lean, and we paid it off. And then after that, let's say that took 2 years, and then the next, let's say 2 3 years after that, we lived really lean and tried to keep it that way. And now with our growth and the amount of people we have, we're to the point where there's just no living lean at all. Like there's just no living lean. It's expensive, taxes are insane,
Yeah.
insurance is insane. There's
You've
no
gotten
living
big
lean at
enough
this
and
point.
you've gotten big enough now, it sounds like, and we can talk about some of that growth, but you've gotten big enough now, like you have to have more employees. It can't just be you driving around in the truck, right? Like you've got to have extra employees and you've got to have office staff and you've got to have all of these additional pieces just to keep the business running. And,
Yeah,
that's kind of some of the challenges of getting as big as what you've talked about. As you grew along the way, especially up until the point where you were able to purchase a second location, but as you grew along the way, what were some of the challenges, some of the pitfalls that you faced as you kind of went along, growing this business?
I think the number one thing, if I could rewind my entire Ducks career, the number one thing I would have done when I bought the Ducks franchise is I would have enrolled in an HVAC school and got my HVAC license. For for two reasons. One, for the knowledge. And then, like I said, when you're starting a duct cleaning company, uh, your first set of marketing basically is going after HVAC companies. And if I would have had that license, the respect that we would have got from HVAC companies would have been much more, where they would have been more willing to give us work sooner and more willing to sell work on our behalf, as opposed to just telling, Miss Jones, the customer, oh yeah, call Ducks. They would have actually trusted us more, sold the job for us, and then kind of subbed us out or gave it to us somehow. But yeah, I think there's quite a few HVAC companies that I like went to when I was young trying to get work, and I didn't really know my stuff. And I think they kind of just like didn't blow us off, but basically said, oh yeah, sure, we'll give you some work. And then you never heard from them again.
Right.
And I mean, obviously you have that any type of sales you're doing, but I think the reason that we had it was really because they could tell that I just didn't know what I was talking about. So I think at the early stages, I would have spent so much more time on educating myself and learning the industry, learning the equipment, and knowing things better, so that no matter what technical question someone asked me, I could have hit them with the technicalities and the answer right away. Like right now, when people ask me those questions, there's no fear. I'm not worried about anything.
Right.
I can answer it 5 different ways, and they're all correct. But I just, you don't have that at the beginning, and I would have tried to acquire that sooner. That would have been the number one thing.
Initially, and you mentioned this, but you talked about some of those initial HVAC companies. Yeah, maybe weren't rude, but didn't end up sending you guys any business. How did you?
And I don't blame them either, because
you weren't experienced.
Now,
right?
Yeah, now in the same situation where reverse the roles and I'm having that, I understand exactly what they were feeling, and I'm like, yeah, nice kid and all, but I can't put him in front of my customer.
Yeah, because you didn't have the knowledge. As a younger Tommy, how did you deal with some of that? I don't, and maybe you just didn't feel this, but if I were in your shoes, I would have felt maybe a little discouraged. It's with dealing with some of that. How did you overcome that? Was it just you had to kind of change your mindset, or as you maybe got a no, you got told no from an HVAC company, or maybe you got told no from just a residential customer? How did you deal with some of those no's and overcome that and continue to, okay, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and we're going to go try again? How did you continue to overcome some of those no's and that discouragement?
Part of it was definitely that I was too stupid, where I didn't even realize what was going on.
Okay.
So gotcha. Like you hear that about a football or basketball team, like they won that game because they didn't know they weren't supposed to win that game. Like they weren't aware enough to know that they couldn't beat that championship team, but they beat them anyway. So I think part of it was that I just was too dumb to even realize what was happening. But also too, I mean, I'm a very persistent person, always have been. So it's kind of like in sales, you're not going to bat 10 out of 10. So every time someone tells you no, you just got to use it as motivation to keep going and find the next one that says yes. But I think it was those two things. I think just not knowing what was going on, and it just kind of going right over my head and not realizing that people were kind of brushing me off.
Yeah.
I think that played an advantage. And then also too, just being persistent and saying, oh yeah, like this isn't a tech startup. You're not going to make $200 million your first year. Like this is going to take some work.
Right. I've heard sales guys describe it as getting a no. It means you're that much closer to your next yes, right? Like if you just play the law of averages, right? Like if you just say, okay, I'm going to get told a yes 1 out of 10 times or whatever, I don't know what the close rate or the number looks like, but I'm going to get told yes 1 out of every 10 times. Okay. If I get a no, that means I'm 8 no's closer to my next yes, right? So I just got to I'm going to keep going out. I'm going to knock doors. I'm going to keep going to HVAC companies. I'm going to do whatever it takes, but you're that much closer to your next yes. And, I've done a little bit of sales in my time. It's not necessarily what I do every single day, but I do a little bit of it. And, it's 100% true that like, hey, okay, I get told no there. All right. Well, tomorrow, maybe I'll get told yes. I'm that much closer to my next yes.
Yeah, and it's the knowledge thing is huge too, because when you can go into a place like that and they ask questions and you can hit them with the technicalities,
Yep.
and they're like, oh wow, he knows his stuff. They're just automatically sold at that point. And like just learning the best times to go see certain contractors, like because initially in our training we were told like, oh, go on a Tuesday or Wednesday in between 10 and 2 p.m. to try and meet with these HVAC owners because that's the best time. Well, that's actually not even close to true. If you want to meet with someone who runs an HVAC company, you get to their office at 6:45 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. for two reasons. One, all the techs are there, which is the guys you need to know, and the
Yeah.
managers are running their meeting. So that's the people you need to know. And two, the gatekeeper, the lady running the front desk, is not there at 6:45. She gets there at 8. So you don't have to deal with that objection. And
Yep.
then you're already walking into all the guys who are already ready to talk about the technicals. Whereas if you show up at, say 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, a lot of HVAC guys work from 4 a.m. to noon and then they're done for the day. By 11 o'clock, if you can even get in their office, they're already done talking about work for the day. They're talking about golf or, the
Right.
NCAA tournament or whatever else.
Yeah.
So I had to learn all of that too, not just like the technicals, but like how to approach this, when's the best time to go, and how to handle each of those situations. So it was definitely quite the process. And like, we did basically the proof of that was it took us, which Philly is a bigger area than Richmond, so obviously that helps, but it took us 4 years in Philly to accomplish what took Richmond 7 years.
Yeah.
So we almost, 2x'd our speed of being able to do something. So it was, it was a whole learning process with every aspect, not just the technical side.
No, I love it. That you gave like a great sales strategy there, like something you have to identify how to get around the gatekeepers, right? Like that's a great sales strategy. It sounds like you've learned, I mean, and selling yourself and selling your business is a huge part of being a small business owner, but like you've found a way to kind of identify, hey, actually no, not going in around lunchtime on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, that's not going to work. Like I've got to be there first thing in the morning before anybody else is there. And so I can talk to some technicians or talk to a manager. Like that's great strategy. And sounds like you were able to identify that pretty quickly and then knock it out of the park. So
yeah, it took longer than I should have. I will say that. I should have realized this because you go there at 6:30, every door in the building's wide open. People are walking in and out. It's a breeze. You walk right in. If you go there at 9 or 10 or 11, everybody's already left the shop. Everybody's in their office. The doors are all closed. You got to go through the whole process. And like I said, if you're there at 11 o'clock, by that time, the managers and owners are done talking about work for the day. They're like, okay, let's talk about golf or something else.
Yeah, I'm exhausted. I don't want to, I've been up since, like you said, I've been up since 4 a.m. I don't want to even think about HVAC right now. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. As you went along and you purchased this second franchise, has there been anything else that you feel like have been some crucial pieces to kind of grow as well as you've been growing? You mentioned in your initial email, and this is just for the audience, but you mentioned in the initial conversation that we had together that you've now got both franchises doing over $1 million in revenue every year. So like what were some other key pieces? You talked about identifying how to get in the door with like HVAC companies. Was there anything else that you feel like was like really big, really kind of a big successful piece to get you to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice having two teams, right? Like two different locations, because like if there's a huge job or something, which that's even outside of that, even when we just had one location, that's always been a thing of like a big fire happens. Okay, there's a job that normally would take us 2 months to do, like, and the customer / restoration company is like, yeah, we need it done in a week, and you're like, okay, like great. So
yeah, good one. Nice try.
Exactly. That's always been a thing. So now having like two fully decked out locations with employees, trucks, equipment, like we're able to do more work, bigger work faster. But I also think there's probably some respect aspect to it, like where now people are like, oh yeah, that's Tommy. He's got two of the top Ducks franchises in the country. He runs both of them, blah, blah, blah. So I think there's probably that aspect as well. But as for like the startup of the Philly one and just building it, it was really like, okay, we learned all this stuff from how we did it in Richmond the first time. Now we know how to make it efficient and do it better. And then obviously, I think the actual numbers, I think Philly is like 6 times the amount of population as the Richmond area.
Right.
So that makes quite a difference.
Yeah. I mean, that helps with your growth as well. Like you're in a large population center.
Yeah.
So you can grow that much quicker. I love hearing that having the extra crews has been helpful in the growth. I think, it's this constant battle and argument when, not an argument, but this constant discussion when we're talking with business owners, like chicken or the egg. Do I need to build up revenue and sales to the point that I can hire people, or do I need to hire people so that I can build up revenue and sales? And I think there's a balance there. I don't think you can have necessarily one way more than the other, or focus on one way more than the other. But I think there is something to having more employees and being able to relinquish some of that stress, especially for you as a business owner, relinquish some of that control to another person that, is maybe better or maybe has more time for it, so that you can focus on, okay, how do I actually grow this business? I'm going to let so-and-so handle the day-to-day cleaning of being out on the truck and going and doing that, so that I can focus on, okay, growing the business and hiring more people or whatever it might be. And I think there's really is something to, again, chicken or the egg argument, right? Like what do I need to get first before I can do the other? But I really think there is something to having some other employees there to help you accomplish that.
And there's also, to where we're at now with the amount of jobs and things we have going on. If I didn't have other people do most of the stuff, it's very easy to get off. I was telling this to one of the newer Ducks owners the other week. I was like, with what we've got going on, I could have 15 random emails a day hit me at the same time. And I now have zero time to do everything that I was supposed to do today, because I have to fight these fires for the next
Right.
2 days. And when you're one truck, one, tech and one helper setup, you don't really have that issue of like, you might have one or two things knock you off base for the day, but you're not going to have 20. Whereas now between the two locations, like I can lose my day extremely quick. And if that happens 2 or 3 days in a row and I have all these tasks to do, then they're never going to get done. Whereas basically how I handle it is like I have nothing to do when I wake up each day. And then as things hit me, I have to figure out what's most important.
Yeah.
But if I try to fill up my schedule for a whole day, that's like a death wish. That's a jinx, automatic jinx of like, I'm getting a bazillion emails that day of crazy stuff that I would have never thought of.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a great strategy, right? Like you've gotten to a point now where you're big enough that you can have those empty days. They don't end up being empty because of the fires and the conversation that you have with employees or customers, but you've gotten big enough now that you can, clear up your schedule so that, okay, this Monday, I don't have anything on my schedule. I know come Monday morning at 8 a.m., I'm going to have 20 emails that I've got to figure out that day. But as far as scheduled, like I'm not going out on any cleanings. I'm not doing any trainings that day. I'm just focusing on helping my team or helping my customers or whatever it might be. And that's honestly, that's a great strategy. And it's proof that you've gotten to the point and hired enough employees that you can do that. Cause there's business owners out there right now that can't do that. They're having to do both. They've got, jobs scheduled that day, as well as also trying to put out fires for, customers or other employees or whatever. Any advice for people that are in that mode right now that don't have the flexibility to, keep their schedule clean? Is there any kind of advice you've got for people like that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that like it took me longer to get to this point than I would have liked, but there was good reason for that. And the reason was I was training our employees better and harder and more than other companies would do, so that when we get to this point, I don't really question too much about them. Like, I can actually trust them on the jobs without me. And a lot of business owners say that, oh yeah, I trust my
But
guys,
they
but
don't.
they don't.
Yeah, they don't.
Right, they don't. And actually 90% of the time I do.
Yeah.
There's definitely some projects that when they go, I'm like, oh Lord, I hope this goes well today. Cause like,
Yeah.
they're high profile, or there's a ton of safety and there's an OSHA guy walking around or whatever. But but yeah, I think the key is train your employees longer and extra, so that when you do step back and let them run things, you can actually trust them and rely on them and have a, sleep at night. I was actually listening to a podcast, and they had Papa John on there, and they asked him, they were like, when you were building the empire, blah blah blah, how long until you had a good night's sleep? Like, everybody sleeps, but like when you're building a business like that, you don't actually sleep and rest.
Right.
And he said it was 16 years before he
Jeez.
finally really would go to sleep at night and take it easy. And I would say it was probably 7 or 8 for me.
Yeah.
Really, it was funny. Like, you wouldn't think it'd work out like this, but right around when COVID was happening was when I really started to get things kind of snowballing the right way and was able to like step back a little. But yeah, I mean, I think training the employees extra so that you can really trust them is the main key, because then that frees you up, and it actually frees you up.
Yeah. Cause it's, yeah, I love the clarification there that it actually frees you up, because you can hire
Yeah.
employees, but if you don't train them well, if they're not the right fit for the job, then you're constantly stressing about them the entire time. You're constantly like, oh, are they doing this job right? Or you're having to help them or hold their hand as they're trying to do the job. Like, so at the end of the day, like, you ended up having to help them the entire time. So you might as well have just done it yourself. So,
And that's, your employees will tell you that. Your current employees will tell you that when you hire a new guy. They'll
yeah,
say to you, they'll say, hey, I can literally do this job without him. Why are you paying him money?
yeah,
Like, and if you're not, I think if you're not close with your employees you have, they're not going to give you that information. There's a lot of employees that don't feel welcoming with their owners or, managers, and they're not going to tell that manager like, hey, this guy's not good, you should find somebody else. Whereas like my guys are going to text me immediately and be like, dude, today you're not going to believe what happened, or something like that. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I think if you're listening, your employees you have, your solid employees will tell you that about the people you hire. And you're exactly right. Like, if you hire the wrong person, it's going to cost you more time than
yeah.
it's going to save you.
Yep. I love it. Tommy, before I don't want to keep you too much longer. You've given us some really, really awesome information, but and before we kind of wrap up with the 3 rapid fire questions, I want to just ask you about the future. What's the future look like for you guys at the Ducks franchises? Are you at both of your locations? What does growth look like to you? Do you have any specific goals for 2023 and beyond? What are you hoping the future looks like for you guys?
Well, they are both growing at like 15 to 20% a year the last 2, 3 years here. So they both have some solid growth going on, but we're really kind of waiting to see what happens with the new IICRC standards and how much that like puts a boost in the industry.
Yeah.
So, and we think it's going to be a pretty significant amount. So like the last year and a half, I've bought vans. Like, I have a couple vans right now that aren't even logoed. They don't have the equipment in them. They're just like sitting in the shop ready, because for a while there, even still tough to get transits from like Ford, but it was like super tough for a while. And so we've been like buying equipment, buying trucks, gearing up for what could possibly happen 2024, 2025. So just in case it does, we're ready for it. But let's say that doesn't happen. We've got solid growth with our, local HVAC companies, getting more of those. A huge thing for us is like local Facebook communities, people put us all over those. And like,
I love it.
One post could go out and we could end up over the next couple of days, we could get 25 calls from someone's,
Wow.
post about like, hey, somebody needs a duct cleaner or whatever. Like, it's very powerful and it's free, and we don't have to spend any time managing it or doing it. Our customers are just, we've done a good job and they're recommending us on there. So those are huge for us. But we're starting in fall. We're doing TV commercials for the Philly location.
Love it.
So that's going to be, we're actually just supposed to shoot the content at the beginning of June. So that's going to be interesting. And then another big thing I've done, which I can share the link with you, but we've made a YouTube video of our full duct cleaning process and our full dryer vent cleaning process for two reasons. One, to like educate people on what it is, and like our customers like, hey, this is what you should expect. But also two, to kind of like to help people identify that that's what the actual industry standard is. Like I said earlier about like giving people the list and say, hey, this is what we do. We can show them the video and say, hey, this is what should be done. And then if there's a property manager that wants to get duct cleaning done, you can show him our video and say, hey, these are our buddies at Ducks. They follow the standard exactly. This video is going to show you what that is. So now when your, corporate board tells you, oh, you have to get 5 bids or 3 bids, you actually can know who's legit and who's not, and who you can trust and who you can't, because you have a video to match it up against. So the big things coming down the pike are the commercials, and then just making more YouTube content so that we can push that out and help educate people. Because with duct cleaning, it's not a ton of selling. Yeah. Like a car salesman, it's like if you can educate the customers and explain it to them, they're going to choose us because it makes the most sense. And we don't have to tell them it makes the most sense. They're going to understand that on their own.
I love it. And I think, like you mentioned there at the beginning, I think the IICRC standards are going to be huge for you guys. And I love that you're prepping for it. I think a lot of people kind of play this wait and see game, and they're just like, well, we'll figure it out when it comes to it. But if you wait till that point, you're already too late. There's going to be another duct cleaning company or whatever down the road that's going to be ready to take advantage of it. And it sounds like you guys are ready. Like, you've got equipment, you've got the guys. Like, when the IICRC standards finally get put in place, like, you guys will be ready to go. And like you said, I think it's going to be a huge boost to your business. So I love it. Tommy, thank you again for all the information and just the insights that you've provided today. I think our audience is going to get a lot of really good info out of this. To wrap up, going to ask you the 3 kind of, and I always put it in air quotes, rapid fire questions, because I don't want you to feel the pressure that you've got to be speedy in any way. But first question that I like to ask here at the end of the podcast. First question: favorite book or podcast that you're reading to or listening to right now that you really love?
I don't have one that I'm like set on. I listen to every episode, but I have enough friends and people like sending me stuff every day.
Yeah.
Where no matter where I'm driving or whatever, I've got something on, because, one day, one of my guys, one of my techs, Derek or somebody, they'll send me one like, hey, check this out. My buddy Matthew, he sends me stuff. So there's always somebody sending me something like, oh yeah, check this one out. So I have enough like business people in my life where there's always something going around. So I'm not really able to just like focus on one.
Yeah. I love that. I think there's a wealth of knowledge out there, and I do very, very similar. I don't necessarily listen to one podcast religiously. I end up listening to kind of a lot, and it's kind of random. Like, one week I'll listen to a couple episodes of this because of, a friend, or I saw it mentioned on social media. And then the next week I'll listen to a couple episodes of something different or whatever. And I'm kind of the same with books. I need to read a lot more, but I end up jumping around a lot because I'll get an awesome book recommendation, whether it's a business or a self-help or even just like a biography. I'll get, check out this guy's biography, and I'll read a little bit, and then I'll jump to another book and end up jumping all over the place. But I think that's great insight. Like, you don't necessarily have to be married to one thing. Like, there's a wealth of knowledge out there. And
that's the entrepreneur's life too. You've got to be good at so many different things at once.
Yeah.
you're not ever really able to just like focus in on one thing
I'm only
and be
going to
the
listen
best at it.
to Ed Milet or whatever, right? Like it's like,
Yeah.
no, like he's great, but like there's all sorts of podcasts out there that offer some great insight. So I love it. Second question. How do you relax at the end of a long day? I know it sounds like you've got a bigger team now, so you maybe don't have as long of like the cleaning days, but you even mentioned that you had a hard time sleeping for the first 7 or 8 years of your business ownership, career.
Yeah.
How do you relax? How do you recharge the emotional and mental batteries at the end of a long day?
Well, I mean, a lot of times you don't get that during the week, but I really have gotten good at using weekends to recharge.
Love it.
And not having a wife and kids, like not having a family, probably makes that a lot easier than for most people. Because, like, every other business I talk to, they're like, "Oh yeah, we got lacrosse this weekend," and I'm just like looking at them like, "How do you even do it?" Like by
Right.
Saturday, I'm like dead.
Yeah.
So I use Saturday to recover. I don't set an alarm on Saturday. I like this last Saturday, I think I slept from like midnight till 10:30 a.m. So like I try to, and I'm like religious about my sleep. I write down as soon as I wake up every morning, the first thing I do is write down how much I slept.
Love it.
So like I can track what's going on. But I use Saturday to catch up. And then at night, like I'm watching the NBA playoffs as much as I can right now. So like I
Love it.
love watching basketball. But if I have free time and I have energy, I play golf and practice golf as much as possible.
Love it. That's great. Those are all things that are right up my alley, man. So I love, basketball, watching the playoffs, playing some golf. Those are great. Those are great ways to recharge and shut your brain off, at least for a little bit. It doesn't necessarily have to be for long periods of time, but at least shut your brain off for a few minutes
The
every day.
weekends, though, the weekends is a big one. I use those, and I use like Sunday afternoon when people are still like in football and doing all that. Like I'm prepping for Monday because
Right.
I'm running the show, so I got to be ahead of the guys. So my Sunday night basically is all prep for Monday morning.
Love it. Last question, Tommy. If you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but I don't know if you want to maybe expound on it or go, pick maybe a different question, but if you could rewind to the beginning of your career with Ducks when you're 19 years old, trying to get this thing up and running, what would be one thing you would tell your younger self? I know you mentioned, go get the training, go get the certification so that you can, better talk to HVAC companies and stuff. Was there anything else that you feel like if I could rewind and tell my younger self one thing, what would it be?
Yeah, no, it'd be education on the financial side of business of like how to put away money for the future, and not just retirement, but like let's put some money away in a money market for a truck we're going to buy in 3 years or whatever. Right. So I'm not talking about retirement. I'm talking about like putting money away for running your business in 3 years from now. And none of us could have ever seen what happened with COVID, but thankfully, when it did, we had some money in the bank saved up. But yeah, I would have done the education on the financial side too, of like, okay, this is how we're going to save money on taxes this year. This is how we're going to plan our budget for 3 years from now, 2 years from now, 1 year from now. So I would have spent more time learning the financials and making smarter financial decisions.
It's great advice, Tommy. I think there's a lot of
that
knowledge.
Cost me quite a bit. So I look back now and I'm like, man, that was really dumb. If only I would have known.
Well, and hindsight's 2020, so you can't you don't want to beat yourself up too much about it. But I think you're right. I think that getting some education on the finances side of things, I think a lot of business owners, especially in more of the home service type industries, restoration, cleaning, what you guys are doing every day. Those guys get started in those businesses because they're like, hey, I can go buy a truck and just kind of get started. And I can go out and clean homes or remove water damage or whatever it might be. But I think they get started and then they realize, oh my gosh, I don't know how to take care of my taxes. I don't know how to set up QuickBooks, and a little bit of pain at the beginning, a little bit of spending the time to get some of that knowledge is worth tons in the future. And I think spending some time to do that is crucial for anyone that's looking to get started in a business. And even if you've started and you've been up and running for a few years, go get that necessary financial education so that you can better manage your business. I think it's huge. So, Tommy, thank you again for coming on the show this week. Super, super fun to have you on and hear all about what you guys are doing over there in Richmond and Philadelphia, and really, really excited to share this with our audience, because I think you've talked about some really, really cool things. So thanks again for coming on, and hope to have you on in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tommy. This has been Success Elevated, making you a little bit better one show at a time. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe on YouTube or any other major podcast platform to listen to more episodes. We are proudly brought to you by Spot On Solutions. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you grow your business, please check us out at spotonsolutions.com.